The 40 trillion US debt and what's being called a bond market explosion are the hottest news in the financial press. It looks to me like creating a financial panic is the next phase of the plan to destroy President Trump ahead of the midterms. But Scott Bessent has a secret plan to crush the speculators. Here's Bessent talking about the debt on Thursday.
The 40 trillion is a big number. And remember, we did not get here in a day. That we were left with a mess. The Biden administration had the highest deficit to GDP in history when we weren't at war or weren't in a recession. For 2025, we brought it down by more than 1%.
And here's J.D. Vance Thursday talking about what he called Scott Bessent's discrete plan to deal with it.
The other thing is that Scott Bessent, the amazing Treasury Secretary, he has had a very discreet plan, of course, supported by the President of the United States, to get the United States to a point where our economy is growing faster than our debt. And if you look, we are on track. So even though the debt is too high, even though we inherited this debt bomb from the Biden administration, we actually do have a plan to get the economy growing faster than the debt. And that's the most important thing.
Now, if you're a Wall Street banker or a City of London financial predator or a current Democrat, you think this is crazy talk from a snake oil salesman. But if you're honest, you really do have to wonder why Trump's economy keeps proving all of your predictions absolutely wrong. I'm Barbara Boyd, and I've studied the American system economics Trump and Bessent are implementing since the 1970s. Today, we're covering three fronts in the same story. First, Scott Bessent's secret plan. Second, why this plan is like Alexander Hamilton put on steroids. Finally, why the global elites will never figure out what Trump and Bessent are doing to them. Now, Scott Bessent's secret plan to deal with the debt and inflation is as old as Alexander Hamilton. Issuing credit for productive purposes through a sovereign wealth fund, special government funds, or the banking system is non-inflationary and even deflationary. If credit funds hard commodity output, new infrastructure, technological development, and the new inventions and discoveries which exist on the frontiers of present science, there's no inflation. That credit doesn't chase existing goods with new money. It expands the goods available so prices don't rise. Not only that, the upskilling of the labor force necessary for this new economy increases the productive powers of labor. Here's the Treasury Secretary saying just that.
That our strength, in other words, is derived from what we can build. For the nation that cannot produce what it needs is not truly secure. And the nation that reduces its economics to consumption is not truly prosperous. Instead, as Hamilton put it, it is essential to enlarge the sphere of our domestic commerce because economic security begins at home. It begins with the capacity to build, invent, finance, and scale the industries that will define the next century. Among them, semiconductors, AI, quantum computing, advanced manufacturing, shipbuilding, critical minerals, and pharmaceuticals, to name only a few. More than sectors of the economy, these are sources of our national power, and America must lead in each of them. In today's economy, supply chains are the domain in which that leadership is tested. Yet for years, the question that seemed to consume both our political and commercial class was, where is the lowest cost?
There's even more. Up until now, who got credit and who didn't was largely determined by Wall Street's dominance of the Federal Reserve. But now Scott Bessent is putting that credit oversight role back where it belongs, with the president and his Treasury Secretary. That's what his recent interventions on behalf of Japan's currency and in support of U.S. Treasury bonds is all about, and why the speculators are screaming. At the same time, Kevin Warsh is cutting the Fed down to size and figuring out, how do you measure real growth in an economy? That measurement is not the sum of Wall Street speculation on a given day or any other measure for economic activity the Fed currently uses. Inflation happens when credit is diverted into things like Joe Biden's COVID relief program and Joe Biden's Build Back Better, service, and green consumer economy. It's directed at providing handouts and funding services or production which do not advance the economy to a higher level of productivity. The other cause is the Fed's constant bailouts and asset purchases to keep this and similar financial schemes going. Since neither expands productive activity, they drive prices up. The models being used by Wall Street and London don't have a box for how does an economy grow out of its own debt. They only have boxes for spending less or taxing more. So when Bessent proposes a third option, growing the productive base until the debt shrinks next to it, their spreadsheet just doesn't compute it. What they keep forgetting is that Scott Bessent teaches economic history and has always bet very resourcefully against them. And he's pulling a 200-year program off the shelf. Now, if this is new to you, you can learn a whole lot more about the real factors driving the economy by subscribing to our free newsletter at PrometheanAction.com. Both Bessent and J.D. Vance keep referring to Alexander Hamilton as their guy, freaking all the field modern economists totally out. But Hamilton is the greatest economic revolutionary in history. Unlike Karl Marx or Milton Friedman, his revolution worked. After the Revolutionary War, our new nation was flat broke. The new states and war veterans were demanding payment on what were essentially worthless IOUs. Hamilton paid off the old war debts, state and federal, at full value using government bonds. The bonds were longer term, paid interest from tariff revenues dedicated to paying them, and they were tradable. Then he built a national bank and allowed people to use their bonds to buy into the bank, which financed only real production, merchants, tradesmen, factories, infrastructures, inventions. That's the same principle Scott Bessent just talked about, making sure the credit exists to fuel productive growth, which is the only real purpose of credit, not money falsely disguised as credit and magically producing more money with no production supporting it. You can go to the White House webpage and read Scott Bessent's secret plan. It's there, spelled out publicly, in the president's executive orders to rebuild our economy. They bring back our industrial and manufacturing base, which Wall Street and London shipped overseas, and they bring it back on a new, modern platform. They also launch the economy of the future, involving large-scale use of nuclear power and revolutionary fusion power. You'll also see the plans for a colony on the moon by 2028 and crash funding for new breakthrough science and technological discoveries. Now, competent economists will tell you that for every $1 invested in advanced scientific programs like the Apollo Moon program, the economy gets $8 to $10 back in economic output. This is the stuff the mainstream media doesn't want you to know or think about. But I'm sure Alexander Hamilton, sitting in his rightful place now, is smiling down on us in approval. Now, on Thursday, Vice President J.D. Vance went to Milltown, Ohio. That's his home. And he made a fire-breathing takedown of the free trade financiers based on his own experience. Listening to the whole speech will fire you up and I think make you very happy. But here is the vice president talking about the deliberate free trade policies of Wall Street and London, which wiped out his hometown.
They said it was irrational, sentimental, old-fashioned to want to preserve the things that make the United States of America special. What we really needed, they said, was to compete and have complete market integration with every nation of the third world. Places where you could pay wages at pennies on the dollar, but didn't have to give your workers health care or good benefits in the process. And anytime somebody dared to put an obstacle in front of that set of ideas, anytime they said, you know what, we need to put tariffs or tough immigration policies to stop that, those people were called backwards, they were called wrong.
And here he is talking about the deaths of despair in his hometown, which followed that.
Economists have measured the ways in which the opioid crisis exploded in the very locations where jobs were shipped overseas. The open borders demanded by those same people brought some innocent people, of course it did. But we also know that it brought a lot of cartels, it brought the fentanyl trade, and it left us with millions of orphan children being raised by aggrieved grandparents. That was the story, of course, of my mamaw and papaw. Now, the blood of these men and women, these so-called deaths of despair, I'm sure you've heard that phrase, but it's almost too abstract for me, because the blood of those people, in my view, it pools at the feet of those who would sell out their country for a cheap bottom line.
And then he says what's happening under Trump with trillions of investment in production, new factories being built all over the country, and manufacturing wages rising along with hiring. And he is able to make this dramatic announcement about the future of his own hometown.
And that brings me to why I'm here today. Because we're not just here to talk about the celebration and the good news and the numbers. We're here to announce that Cleveland Cliffs is making today, right here in Middletown, Ohio, a $1 billion investment in transformational manufacturing right here in our home.
Now, the elite free traders who gutted Milltown are the same people who said tariffs would create inflation. The Iran war would create a paralyzing oil shock. Halting illegal immigration would create a massive labor shortage. They've been wrong every single time because they don't understand real economics. Their models and measurements are for a world where resources are fixed and prices are endlessly manipulated on that basis. That's the world Donald Trump is driving out of existence. If the vice president keeps giving these kinds of speeches and the president and Scott Bessent keep implementing Hamilton's policies, the midterms will be theirs. Getting this message out widely will make that victory possible. That's our job at Promethean Action, and I hope you can contribute as much as you can to help us grow. This has been your Saturday Wrap. Thanks for listening.